Anniversary of Lyndon Johnson declaring war on poverty. It's a fact that we have spent over $16 trillion in those 49 years, and it has failed. I mean, I like your hashtag, poverty must end. I agree entirely. But let me give you two sets of dissenting views. The welfare reform program worked. The greatest decrease in child poverty in America came under Bill Clinton with the Republican Congress in the late 90s. And that's just a fact. Jeffrey's shaking his head. No, it's a fact. In fact, the lowest level of black children in poverty in history was 1999-2000. So you can make an argument that having the welfare system shift towards opportunity would work. I'll give you a parallel today.
Before you go further, I'm going to give you all the time you need. So what would you say then to those of us who read the New York Times front page stories, I'm sure you did, when they did the review 15 years after Bill Clinton's welfare to work program, that women and children were falling faster into poverty than anybody else? That program, were they wrong?
Yes, it's easy for me as a conservative to say, sure. But in the New York Times, that's easy. But let me carry you two steps further. I've been working with former California Assembly leader Pat Nolan on a project state by state to get people out of prison if they are there for nonviolent crimes, to get them brought back into society. You can't discuss how we're going to solve some of these problems without rethinking prison in America. One last example, just to show you how we're going to be thinking differently. Unemployment compensation, I just was last week with Sebastian Thrun, who's at Google, who taught a course with 151,000 people registered, 140,000 of whom actually completed the course, and the top 440 graduates were students who weren't at Stanford. They had taken the course and learned so much, they beat the highest ranking Stanford student. All right? Now, his goal is to reduce tuition by 90% in higher education. Now let me apply that to the unemployed. If you give people 99 weeks of unemployment, that should be an associate's degree. We have no provision today to say, if you sign up for unemployment, here are courses you could take that will help you get the skills so you can get a job. It's fundamentally important. The key to poverty is productivity. The key to productivity, as Jeffrey suggested in passing, is being honest about an underclass, in itself a very dangerous phrase. We don't have people who lack culture. We have people whose cultures are very destructive of their capacity to enter prosperity.
Let me ask this one question, and I want to get it out of the way so you can explain what you meant when you said it, so that we can all hear it. And I'm going to talk to Mariana later in this conversation, and I know she wants to get into this, and I want to get into it. So when you referred to Barack Obama while you were running as a food stamp president, tell me what you meant. Tell me what you said and what you meant.
Since you know fully well, the vast majority of people who get food stamps are white. That couldn't possibly be a reference to race. It takes the elite media to assume they're referring to food stamps. What I meant was, he has followed policies, and this is a different but important argument. He has followed policies which have limited job growth for the last 4 years. This is the weakest recovery of any period since the Great Depression. And if you don't get a recovery, you don't have jobs. If you don't have jobs, you're not in a position to help people get out of poverty because there's no place for them to go to. And so we've had policies which make it relatively easier to extend unemployment, relatively easier to have food stamps, but we're not helping people get back to a level of investment and productivity that creates the kind of jobs we need to get out of here. And you look at Japan, which has been in a recession since '89. You look at Greece, which has over 25% unemployment. Spain, over 25% unemployment. I worry about a recovery that is not creating jobs and is not pulling people into a better future.
I'm going to get everybody involved in this conversation one by one, and then we're going to mix it up. So let me just continue what I do every year of getting everybody, at least initially, into the conversation. Dr. West, I want to come to you now because I was running around doing some media today, and I understand you were doing some media as well, and I actually was in the car at one point today here in the nation's capital when you were on a local radio program talking about this conversation tonight, so thank you for promoting that. But I'm coming to you now because I heard you start to sound off with regard to your thoughts about what it means for Barack Hussein Obama to be sworn into a second term as president on the King holiday. So you heard the applause in this auditorium when I suggested that in my view, and I think in your view, that Dr. King is the greatest American we've ever produced. So we know that he looms large. We know the inauguration is happening on the holiday. We know this is the first time that a president will be inaugurated with a King monument memorial just down the street. His Bible now has been brought into the equation. Let me just start by asking you for your opening thoughts on help me, which you do so well given when you teach, help me properly situate what's about to happen on Monday vis-a-vis poverty in America.
No, but first I just want to salute you, my brother. We've been in the trenches now for 20 years, sometimes misunderstood, sometimes demonized, sometimes ostracized, but we're stronger than ever, and we still come. We still But when I got the news that my dear brother Barack Obama, President Obama, was going to put his precious hand on Martin Luther King Jr.'s Bible, I got upset. And I got upset because you don't play with Martin Luther King Jr. and you don't play with his people. By his people, what I mean is people of good conscience, fundamentally committed to peace and truth and justice, and especially the black tradition that produced it. All the blood, sweat, and tears that went into producing a Martin Luther King Jr. generated a brother of such high decency and dignity that you don't use his prophetic fire as just a moment in a presidential pageantry without understanding the challenge that he presents to all of those in power, no matter what color they are. So the righteous indignation of a Martin Luther King Jr. becomes a moment in political calculation. And that makes my blood boil. Why? Because Martin Luther King Jr., he died owing to 3 crimes against humanity he was wrestling with. Jim Crow, traumatizing, terrorizing, stigmatizing black people, lynching and so forth, not just segregation, the way the press likes to talk about. Second, carpet bombing in Vietnam, killing innocent people, especially innocent children. Those were war crimes Martin Luther King Jr. was willing to die for. And thirdly was poverty of all colors. He said it's a crime against humanity for the richest nation in the history of the world to have so many of its precious children of all colors and living in poverty, and especially on the chocolate side of the nations, and on Indian reservations, and brown barrios, and yellow slices, and black ghettos then. We call them hoods now, but ghettos then. So I said to myself, okay, nothing wrong with putting your hand on the Bible, even though the Bible's talking about justice, and Jesus is talking about the least of these. But when you put in Martin's Bible, I said, this is personal for me, because this is a tradition that I come out of. This is a tradition that's connected to my grandmother's prayers and my grandfather's sermons and my mother's tears and my father's smile. And it's over against all of those in power who refuse to follow decent policies. So I say to myself, Brother Martin Luther King Jr., what would you say about the new Jim Crow? What would you say about the prison-industrial complex? What would you say about the invisibility of so many of our prisoners? So many of our incarcerated, especially when 62% of them are there for soft drugs, but not one executive of a Wall Street bank. At all. Then what'd you say about the drones being dropped on our precious brothers and sisters in Pakistan and Somalia and Yemen? Those are war crimes just like war crimes in Vietnam. Martin Luther King Jr., what would you say? My voice hollers out, then don't tame it. With your hand on his Bible, allow his prophetic voice to be heard. Martin, what would you say about the poverty in America now, beginning with the children, and then the elderly, then our working folk, and all colors, not just here, around the world? Don't hide and conceal his challenge. Don't tame his prophetic fire. So as much as I'm glad that Barack Obama won, I think that Brother Mitt Romney would have been a catastrophe, and I understand that. But the truth of it attempts to use that rich tradition. Frederick Douglass, Ida B. Wells Barnett, use the tradition of A. Philip Randolph, use the tradition of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, use the tradition of Tom Hayden and so many others struggling to produce that voice that pushed Martin in the direction that he did. I get upset. People say, oh, Brother West, there's Smiley and West hating Obama. No, no. We just loving the tradition that produced Martin Luther King Jr. and we're not going to allow it to be in any way sanitized, deodorized, and sterilized. We want the subversive power to live. That's what made me feel when we say we have to live in that. You Catholic, I'm Holy Ghost funky, got good bucket Baptist. What we praying for? They're putting pressure on me.
So Doc mentions the children.
Yes, yes.
And that's a perfect segue to go straight to Jonathan and to Mariana. Let me start with you first, Jonathan, and then I'll work my way back this way. I mentioned earlier Jonathan Colesville has done